Booyah, and it's time for the Game Sports Podcast. It is your host, David McKeag Jr. The Game Sports Podcast is powered by 91 and 91 Network, formerly known as TGEM, and is sponsored by Flawless Roofing SureSeal Incorporated. Flawless Roofing SureSeal Incorporated, over 30 years in the business, based in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. But no matter where you are, you can check them out on their website, flawlessroofing.ca. Got to protect your investment and start from the top. Nowhere else you should be looking than Flawless Roofing. And if you are observing this show via YouTube or video, you can see that I have moved slightly over to the left to point at the calendar that is right behind me, right dead center, with the Flawless Roofing logo. As mentioned, Flawless Roofing SureSeal Incorporated, over 30 years in the business. Protect your investment and start from the top. Residential and commercial rooftops. If you'd like further details, comment below or reach out to us here on the Game Sports Podcast. Now, as I mentioned, David McKeag Jr. here for the Game Sports Podcast, and we have a one segment edition for you today, a little shorter segment that we are used to here on the Game Sports Podcast. And it is going to be a hockey agenda for this episode, and it's going to revolve around two topics: Mike Babcock and the PWHL, and just around the draft and my comments about the PWHL as well. And I'm just going to have a lot of comments about Mike Babcock. And that is going to be talked and discussed after I get through the normal housekeeping items that we got to get to, not just our sponsors. I just have a few announcements that I want to make sure that are on this episode of the Game Sports Podcast. There will be an upcoming announcement for the 91N official name change over TGEM, which will reflect the YouTube channel name, etc. But that doesn't change anything. When you search the 91N, 91 Network, it will bring you to the YouTube page and all supporting platforms around 91N. The current platform that is what it is now will be and will remain the same, as well as the content providers. It is simply just a name change, and there will be an announcement for that. And just a reminder, of course, the Game Sports Podcast, everyone knows us as the Game Sports Show. That has been changed to the Game Sports Podcast. Simply put, I have withdrawn and moved on from the radio side of the broadcasting for the game, and we are sticking to podcast and podcasting platforms going forward. So it made sense to alter that name to reflect what we are doing going forward. Very simply put for you. Now, upcoming shows and shows of the game. Look, there's going to be a lot this week. Right now, when I'm recording this, it is September the 19th at 9 p.m. as I sit inside here in the 91N office. And already this week, we've done a pre-recording for a very special show that's going to be getting uploaded on September the 29th. I'll get to that in just a few moments. There's been a recent upload for the Strike Zone podcast. There will be an In the Pocket podcast. And there, of course, is this podcast. So 3 recordings this week, 2 of which presented by the Game Sports Podcast, and of course this one, which is the headline show of the Game Sports Podcast. There's also Full Time that I was not a part of, but Daniel Scarpino and Gaetano were a part of. So there's 4 shows right there this week just to check out there. And upcoming this week will be the Bitter Rivals podcast, which is powered and presented by 91, and that'll be on YouTube. There's going to be a Top Shelf show that I won't be a part of for the first time in an opening of a show, but that's coming next week for the preview of the 2023-2024 season. And lots of content just coming your way. But as of recent and upcoming, there will be shows to check out. As I said, recently you can check out Full Time and Strike Zone. And upcoming, of course, you're checking this out. We can also get ready for another edition of In the Pocket, and upcoming are Top Shelf and more In the Pocket editions, and further upcoming Strike Zone and Full Time edition. So make sure you keep it locked here on the Game Sports Podcast content. Now, if you're asking about the official announcement upload that I was discussing, just keep an eye on all the platforms for that. And a special edition upload, which we haven't had for quite some time. We have a few ready to be coming out to you. The next one will be James Cebulski that we will next have up for you and plan to have uploaded within the next 14 to 16 days to give you an exact amount there in time for when you are ready to play the new NHL game coming up. Makes sense, right? So there's my housekeeping items. that I want to make sure that I let you know of. The last thing I want to make sure I bring up is what I just mentioned a few moments ago about a special pre-recording. We did record a Scott Nason tribute show, and we did have to do a pre-recording for the edition, and it will be uploaded on September the 9th at some point in the late morning or mid-afternoon of September the 29th. They'll be uploaded on the YouTube channel. They'll be uploaded on all of our audio platforms, including Podbean as well. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. Scott Nason, the original heartbeat of the show and co-founder with yours truly of the game. It will be a show, our first tribute show to Scott. Our first annual tribute show is what I should say, because we did have 2 tribute shows for him last year after his unexpected passing, both on the American side for a show and here on the Canadian side. And for this episode that we're going to be uploading for Scott on the 29th is a tribute show that will feature myself, EJ Russell, Paul Van Wagner, Butch Davis, Rob Horn, and Daniel Scarpino. So you make sure you do not miss that. Now, I'm about 6 minutes in, and I have been cut to a time here to keep this at approximately 15 to 20 minutes, and I feel I'll be able to do that today, and that's why I kept the agenda smaller. I did want to get into some basketball discussion, and I had a little bit of even a desire to get into a little bit of baseball and basketball. But look, if you want to look at baseball, Strike Zone's a recent upload you can check out. And basketball, I'm going to wait until I have a certain guest that I have hope to come on within the next edition or 2 for you. So I'm going to stick to hockey right now to be able to get some news out on some hot takes in terms of on the ice. And the first thing I want to go to is Mike Babcock. Okay. And Mike Babcock situation has, when it surfaced just under 2 weeks ago within the Spitting Chicklets podcast for Paul Bissonnette, whom is obviously well known and an influential hockey face in the world, and also just in podcasting in general. Him and Witt do a very good podcast, as we know, and a very known podcast that gets a lot of interaction. And Biz shared on that show some details from a player about what Mike Babcock was doing to the Columbus players. When that surfaced, more things started happening, domino effects, people reacting, people causing an uproar about it against somebody who is already labeled to be a coach that isn't a positive influence on his players given his actions, for a good way to put it. And things continue to domino. You have Johnny Gaudreau had an interview with Sportsnet, and he brings up how Babs wanted to have wanted to see his picture, to see his family. So you start seeing now a player admitted it, and now things get even more further snowball in the investigation, right? And we get the announcement just this week that Mike Babcock has resigned as the coach with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and he hasn't even yet played a game hasn't coached a game rather with the Columbus Blue Jackets yet. Now, obviously, what I want to say here first is that when this type of stuff comes out, especially on a podcast like Spittin' Chicklets, look, there's a difference between particular platforms that are looking for clickbait, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm proud to say that I feel the Game Sports podcast in our family is not like that. We're very true with our facts and with our content, and we're very honest. And as everybody knows, we've been since 2016. We like to not follow scripts. We like to follow maybe a little note and agenda that we list on the show, but we like to follow what we know and speak it true. And when it comes to Spittin' Chicklets, amongst other well-known podcasts, especially hockey podcasts, that those are personalities on that show that know that they're followed, and that's somebody who is not going to make up any nonsense. Okay, he doesn't need clickbait. He doesn't need popularity. He doesn't need something to get more traction to his platforms, because he already gets it. When he said that, I knew that he had some sort of fact. It was either a text message from somebody within the organization, or there was something there that really got the ball rolling. And I know people were looking at Biz saying, "Oh, this is maybe fake. This is who knows if this is true, is somebody being attacked. And I did see those types of comments. But obviously, over 95% of the comments believe Biz. And those 95% were the right ones and should be patting themselves on the back for not giving any backlash to Biz and the Spit and Chicklets podcast. Because, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, they speak truth. That if I had to say anything about a podcast content, they're jokative, but the guests they get on there, they're telling you true stories. And that's why they are what they are. They get people on there, and they get personalities that can jive with them and that are known in the world of hockey, and they get the true stories out of a lot of their experiences. Let me give you an example. John Morasti, Nasty Morasti. We've had him on this podcast for a few editions ago, and obviously he's well known for Shorzy. He goes on Spit and Chicklets. Okay, after being on Spit and Chicklets for the past, I believe it was the month of September, and you can check out John Morasti's Facebook page. He's been the most searched guy on HockeyDB. Not kidding you. Over 12,000 views or 12,000 searches. He is getting searched more than Connor Bedard right now on HockeyDB. Look, it's a Spit and Chicklets effect. They get news, they say it, and they say it how it is. I believed it from the start. I didn't just believe it because he was a Toronto Maple Leafs head coach that made Mitch Marner cry and made Mitch Marner write a list about guys who didn't work hard enough and pass it on. And I talked to, I'm not quoting other figures such as Mike Commodore. I love his reactions, especially on Twitter, X, whatever we want to call it going forward. But I was able to connect to somebody who is in the National Hockey League. I'm not saying a player or a coach, but somebody. And they know somebody who was, well, let's just say coached by BABS. And when this news surfaced, ironically, this individual had a conversation with this player that played under BABS. And the key word that he shared with me was that they were not surprised. And that's a word that I saw throughout everybody's broadcasts that I've seen on YouTube or other podcasts, is that they were not surprised this has happened. History tends to repeat itself, right? And you look at all the stories with Babcock, with Johan Franzen, you look at Mitch Marner, Mike Modano. Truthfully, the Mike Modano one, truthfully, is the one that upsets me the most, believe it or not. But when I read in more to the Johan Franzen situation, that is by far, it feels like the worst one because of how he just verbally attacked him, verbally abused him. He had mental health issues because of that. Listen, Mike Babcock was a successful coach in terms of winning. We can't take that away from him. All right, it's just like Barry Bonds hitting over 700 home runs. Okay, over 760 home runs. Yeah, he did it doing steroids. There was cheating involved. There's obviously drama involved, but it was done. It's a piece of history that was concluded and written in. Now Barry Bonds faces the fact of not even having his name on the record anymore, and how that compares to Babcock. Let me explain to you. Babcock won gold medals. He's won at each level. He's won a Stanley Cup. And obviously as a coach, he has ways with the X's and O's and putting lines together that are going to help you win hockey games. But let's backtrack a minute. Mike Babcock won that Stanley Cup, won those gold medals, won those championships because of having the pleasure of putting on white gloves when he goes into those teams to coach. And what I mean by that is that he was able to keep his hands clean. There was very minimal work that he had to do to bring that team to success. And the Detroit Red Wings were one. Look at that team. Look how good that team was. They were good. They were in the playoffs for 20 plus years, right? They were a team that was well coached for a long time. Scotty Bowman, obviously Ken Holland. I got the pleasure to talk to Ken Holland, and there's a guy who's who's a very smartly spoken hockey guy, who's now with the Oilers, of course. But that's an organization that, for pride, for many years was the most successful organization in hockey in the National Hockey League. And Mike Babcock goes to that team after leaving a team with Anaheim that had so much promise with their future. And when he leaves Anaheim, he goes to Detroit. And when he was in Anaheim, I'm trying to remember the year exactly, 2003, I believe, was the year that he made the Cup Finals with the Ducks, and they were called the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim at that time. And it was in 2005 was when he joined the Detroit Red Wings, and then he went on to win the Stanley Cup in 2008. And then, of course, he had his tenure there with the Detroit Red Wings, and then after playing or coaching the Red Wings, he goes to the Toronto Maple Leafs. After coaching Toronto, he gets off grid for a bit. He volunteers at the University of Saskatchewan. Again, I'm not going to fact check that. This is just me from what I can remember. Don't hear from him for 4+ years. Columbus signs him out of the blue. Press conference him. They feel that's the right signing, and not even before the puck drops in the season, he's been terminated. And it's been for something that he's been accused of for a long time, and that's for being not just a bad coach, but a bad coach of towards his ability and his treatment of players, which is awful. And I go back to Detroit. You go back to even when he was coaching the Cincinnati Ducks. There was people sharing stories about when he was there. At the Lindstrom story with Mike Babcock, giving him absolute just lambasting into him about how much of a shit show he was being to Franzen and treating his players. He goes to Toronto, and I talked about the Mitch Marner thing already. And then after, Babs gets fired, it almost seems like Toronto wanted him to get fired after that Vegas game. And after he gets fired, it seems the morale changed in Toronto, right? And I don't know what Columbus really tried to do there, maybe try to salvage somebody's career, show that he was truly a good guy. But what they ended up realizing is that his old tactics didn't change. There was no altering to what he did. There was no maturity. There was no lesson learned. And Biz said it perfectly today. This is kind of a set in the bar for the older coaches to know that this is not going to be handled anymore. End of story. And it's obviously, if you want to go back, it's a friend of the show, and obviously went through a lot, was Theo Fleury. Obviously different circumstances, but there's still different types of that abuse that can scar a player despite their age. Younger, professional, older, veteran, doesn't matter. And Mike Babcock doing what he did, just to summarize it, was asking players to look in their phones so they could see the type of person that they are. Look, I wouldn't have never had a problem showing a coach my phone because of not having anything. And even if there was anything that I wanted to hide, I probably would have shown, because as a kid, when the way that I grew up in hockey, it was that you just wanted to play, right? And I had great coaches growing up, so I've never had an issue with any abuse. I want to make that clear. I've had great coaches. I've obviously had disagreements with coaches and, getting traded in my time, but I never had anything, of course, that was a traumatic event. So at that time, though, when I was playing, and a lot of the 90s birth years can relate, and there's a good amount of them that are, in the National Hockey League right now, they're getting into their just almost their mid-30s now, but there was a very strong era when you played minor hockey, and when you played getting up into junior, it was a tough time, right? You wanted to play, you wanted to beat out the guy. It was, you had to go to the rink, you had to fight for a spot a different way. Now it is the same way. Don't get me wrong; it's 100% the same way, but it's actually finally more recognized, the mental health aspect, and it's not even just in hockey or in sports; it's in the world. And the treatment of players is so important and so analyzed. And don't get me wrong, despite how I said about the positive remarks from my coaches, they did a few things in practice and the way that they talked to some of their players that if that happened now, that wouldn't happen. Okay. And I'm not mentioning names. It's not like it's anything dramatic in any which way, but the way the game is now, there are proper ways to coach, and a coach truly has to be a coach that's just raising his voice. But going back to Babs, he goes and asks for pictures of somebody's phone. That is an invasion of privacy. As I matured in life and realized, if somebody asked me for my phone now, despite having nothing to hide, you have no business looking at my phone. I don't want you to see pictures of my family. I don't want you to see pictures of my dog, my wife, my parents, my in-laws. No, I don't want. No, that's none of your business. And I hope some of the players did say that. We didn't really get a lot of the full story about some of the background, but I imagine that the way the conversation was, maybe Babs truly didn't have any bad intent. We're not in his body to know how he's feeling, but he's got to know that given all the stuff he has been through and all the things and actions that he did with Franz and with Marner, what happened with Lindstrom, when he coached other teams and everything that's surfaced, it's kind of like, oh shit, I got to change my tactics. And he never did. He never changed a thing. Not one thing was changed. He didn't smarten up. He didn't mature. He decides to go in and say, hey, I want to look at your phone and look and see what kind of person you are. No, you don't get to look at the phone. You can fuck off. Exactly. But would somebody say in the NHL? No. Would somebody say that to their boss? No. And I'm not encouraging anyone to say that to in any which way. But what needs to happen is that the NHL and sports in general need to continue to invest in these, ensuring a safe and a private environment for these players. They need to focus on playing hockey. Columbus didn't need this drama going in. They didn't need any of this. But it's good that they got rid of it before the puck drops on preseason, never mind regular season. They bring in Vincent as the coach, which, by my investigation, looks like somebody they probably should have looked at before anyways. But that's besides the point. You get rid of this drama beforehand and you leave it at that. And I'm quoting Biz again. The media should shut up and leave them alone about it now. It is done. Everywhere you look on Instagram today, TikTok, and as I said, today's September the 19th, and you might hear this on the 20th, 21st, 22nd. Either way, it's so relevant content. We're going to be talking about Mike Babcock for a little bit here. And his name, whenever he's brought up, you're going to think of all the negative that he did. Yes, I talked about the stuff that he did as a coach where he won, but the things that were sour in our mouth is what we're going to remember most over everything that he did as a coach to succeed. But even as I said at the top, he succeeded as a coach on good teams. The Ducks were good in 2003. You can give credit to his coaching all you want, but he had some good teams. Look at the rosters that he's had. When he went to Toronto, obviously he had to look at a rebuilding team, and it's not like he made that rebuilding team get into the playoffs, right? There was a lot that came out when he went to Toronto. As soon as he went to Toronto, that's when things started surfacing a lot. But we knew of these things beforehand. Mike Modano, Johan Franzen, all this already happened. And it was reacted in Toronto, finally went over the edge. It finally came to surface, and he was let go, and he was gone away from the game. Guys like Mike Commodore are celebrating in the streets. But now he returned to the game, and you wonder what the fuck Columbus is doing. And then this happens, and you create drama in a locker room that really doesn't need it right now. They have a lot of good players there. You got Goudreau, Laine, Werenski, you got Provorov there now. They got some pieces. Fantilli is an absolute stud. The future can be positive in Columbus, and I don't think Babcock would have been the guy to change it. And with this happening doesn't make it any better. But removing him now and focusing on the season is the right step. And I think as the media, after we say our piece about it in all of our shows and all of our articles, get it out, leave it at that, and let Columbus focus on their season. Because when we keep talking about something, we keep bringing up something that's a bad event. Let's leave that behind and let's talk about something that's worth talking about and that's happy to talk about, and that's the upcoming season. Columbus, now their players are professionals. They'll shrug it off. But as a media guy myself, with everyone out there, I second what Biz said. Let's back off now and leave it, say our piece, and proceed. Don't ever let Mike Babcock in the game either again. All right? NHL, that's it. The older guys that can't get their shit together, leave them out of the game. That's it. Time to move on. New coach in Columbus. That's it. Preseason's been going on. A lot of good things happening in the NHL. And obviously Toronto had their golf day today. They had some good content. Teams have good content like Pittsburgh delivering their season tickets. There's a lot of good things to look forward to this NHL season. I think there's going to be a lot of good storylines. And in an upcoming Top Shelf segment, boys, we'll get into a full preview for you. Dave McKay here on the Game Sports Podcast. I'm already 4 minutes over, so I'm going to get to my last portion a little bit more quickly, to get through my last portion a little bit more quickly than what I had hoped. But we're going to be sure to bring this up sporadically on the show a little bit more this year because it's finally picking up traction. And I want to talk about the PWHL. There was a draft that was held just earlier this week, and there was rounds from 1 to they went all the way around the clock. There was free agent signed, but I believe it went all the way up to 15 rounds. There was free agents signed. The teams were basically filling out the roster. If you're looking at the teams that are in the league, you got Montreal, you got Ottawa, you got New York, you got Minnesota, Toronto, and Boston. You got 6 teams in the league. And for the first overall pick in the inaugural draft, the first time ever, the first pick was Taylor Heist. She is an American forward, and it was playing at the University of Minnesota. Gets drafted by Minnesota, and then you have for Toronto, Jocelyn Larocque, the defenseman that they drafted. Elena Mueller was drafted from Switzerland to Boston, who played at Northeastern University. Ella Shelton, a defenseman who's Canadian, got drafted by New York, played at Clarkston. Ottawa drafted Savannah Harmon, a defenseman from Clarkston University, an American, and then Montreal drafted Aaron Ambrose, a Canadian defenseman from Clarkston University. So defensemen really invading the first round, 4 of the 6 picks being defensemen. But it was a very entertaining draft, to say the least, because at the beginning, Billie Jean King was the one who announced the first overall pick, and they had the stick for the inaugural draft that was presented. It's really great. All the staff is picked out. They really put together this league well, and I do hope that it is successful. But here on the Game Sports Podcast, I wanted to make sure that I brought up the draft, brought up players that were selected, and just for you to give it a little check out and listen to Billie Jean's speech. I was going to try to clip it into the show here today, but given time constraints, I will not be able to do that. So just go on over to any of the sports platforms there, one of the ones that you commonly see on TV at this time, to check out that beginning speech. It was really cool. And it seems like this league is going to be really good, really competitive, and definitely will be something to enjoy. And we'll be able to talk more when about the league as the season gets started. Now, some players that you're probably wondering about, the Hillary Knight, some names that you're thinking of. There are players that are going to be signed. There's one that I want that are going to be signed. But there's one that I wanted to bring up that was signed. And it was signed by New York, which is really cool. It was Abby Rock. Abby Rock is from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. As everybody knows, that the Game Sports Podcast is based in the Twin Sault, but obviously I'm based in Sault, Ontario. We're a border town with Sault, Michigan. And Abby Rock was somebody that I got to do color commentating for when I was doing the Sault High Blue Devils game. She was playing with the men out there, and she was out skating everybody out there. Okay, she is a fantastic hockey player. She has a great supporting cast on social media. She was signed as a free agent to go to New York. So there's a little bit of ties that are Sault Ste. Marie for those. So those who are based in the Sault right now, something maybe a little bit more to urge you to check on all the rosters and about everybody who was picked. And one thing that I really like about this league, I think it's going to really empower more women to play professional hockey. And I think we are just at the beginning of seeing the talent that women can bring to the ice, even more so than what we already see in the Olympics and at university hockey. They're finally going to get the exposure that they deserve. Okay, and I hope that everything goes successful with this league, as it seems like it's going to be. And I feel this league is going to really bring women out to the forefront of the sport on ice, if you will. But congratulations to Abby Rock for signing. A lot of good talents out there that signed and were drafted as well. David McKay here for the Game Sports Podcast. As I mentioned at the top, this will be a one segment and done episode. There's a lot of episodes to check out this week on all the platforms. Look, I've already named all of it what it was. There's a lot of content. Just when you're done listening to this, if you haven't listened to Strike Zone full time, or if you're curious for some football that's coming on In the Pocket, if you're waiting for hockey, that's coming. If you're waiting for a special edition, that'll be coming soon. There's a special tribute show coming up. There's a lot. Just hit like, follow, and subscribe below on whatever platform that you're on. Make sure you hit that notification button so you don't miss the uploads that we have. We have uploads every week. Feels like every other day we have an upload of something, but there's always content coming from the Game Sports Podcast. And of course, whom we're powered by 91N. And speaking of 91N, if you are doing a podcast or you're interested in starting a podcast, you can reach out to me and I can direct you in the right area. So we'd like to air 91N. Sorry, would like to air your podcast on 91N, or if you're interested in starting a podcast, there are members of 91N family, including myself, that can help you get started on starting your podcast. The Game Sports Podcast will be taking a brief vacation. So as I mentioned, there are upcoming shows. So I'm not talking about those other news shows. Speaking of this particular podcast, the one that you're listening to right now, there will be another brief waiting period to another episode. I know there's been some inconsistent uploads the past 3 months, given summer months and certain other show criterias. But as of right now, today, September the 19th, there will not be another Game Sports Podcast until likely October the 16th or the 23rd. Okay, or sorry, October 16th or the 23rd are the projected next episodes. You're looking at another 3 to 4 weeks until another episode. And if you're looking for the reason why, well, gracefully, you're getting a lot of me this week because I will be stepping away just for 2 weeks to focus on other projects and also other planned events that I have going on. So that's why I'll be taking my first vacation this year away, and the boys will have you covered. The crew will have you covered on all the content that you desire here on the game and all the supporting shows of the game, and also 91N's YouTube platform. I want to thank you for tuning into the Game Sports Podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you really enjoyed it, like I said, hit like, follow, and subscribe to make sure you don't miss any content that comes to you by yours truly and all of us here on the Game Sports Podcast. I'm here to remind you to keep your stick on the ice, swing your bats, catch touchdowns, drain your threes, and shoot your shots. Booyah.